Now I'm joined by Joel Benenson, former senior advisor to Hillary Clinton's 2016 campaign, and Hugh Hewitt, an MSNBC host and political analyst. A little bit from the left and the right here. Joel, I'll start with you. Just this big picture question of Donald Trump. Look, he's out there saying my base is stronger than ever. We're looking at the numbers. We're saying we know his overall approval rating by any historical measure is not good right now. We're also looking at numbers that say when you look at his vote, it's not that good. I got to say, though, I think back to a year ago. I think back to the campaign. I was looking at the numbers every day. You were looking at plenty of numbers. I think we saw the same thing. We saw signs throughout that campaign that he was doing terribly overall and that he was having problems in his base. And then on Election Day, something else happened. So I guess it's a bigger picture question to me. How can we really be sure with Trump what exactly these numbers mean?
Well, I think you can be sure because right now he's out there by himself. He's the president of the United States. He's able to dominate the news cycle in a way with no opponent out there firing at him the way you are in a campaign. There's a lot of back and forth. You're running negative ads. Right now, the damage is self-inflicted. And I see numbers beyond his approval and disapproval ratings in a couple of polls that are even more problematic. You now have 1 in 5 Republicans in the Quinnipiac poll recently that said he's not honest. You have 1 in 5 Republicans in the Economist YouGov poll who say he doesn't care about people like me. Those are terrible numbers for a Republican president. And if you look at the numbers on each of those metrics with independents, it's a majority now. You can't create a governing coalition with those kinds of numbers. And those are self-inflicted wounds.
Well, Hugh, let me ask you about some of those numbers that Joel's just talking about, because this is what I've been wondering about the Republican base, about the Trump base. I remember seeing devastating numbers for him, even with Republicans in the 2016 campaign. And the question it raises to me, from your standpoint, and maybe you can speak to this, is there a type of Republican out there doesn't particularly like Donald Trump, doesn't necessarily think he's all that good of a guy, but thinks he's sort of their, I don't know, their vehicle in a broader, almost cultural fight that's bigger than politics?
I think that's part of it, Steve. There's something called social desirability bias, which I'm sure Joel and you know a lot more about than I do. But it's simply the atmosphere in which people are less forthcoming about what they really believe. I think Secretary Clinton's new book, What Happened, when it comes out, it's the best title I've long time. I'm still trying to digest what happened. And if I can just use one example and ask you and Joel how to explain this. Trumbull County, my home county, Warren, Ohio, voted for Al Gore by 60%, by John Kerry by 60%, by President Obama twice for 60%. Secretary Clinton got less than 45%. What the hell happened? And I think in the upper Midwest, upper Mississippi Valley, there's a story by Dan Alott today in the Washington Examiner. The same thing happened. Massive, unanticipated shifts. Those people haven't shifted away from Trump. I think the president stands for a complete rejection of the political class, both left and right. He's kind of like the dragon in Game of Thrones. He just turned the table over. And I don't know that we can fully trust these numbers to tell us anything yet.
And Joel, I got to say, big picture, what Hugh is raising there is where I've been since the election, has been trying to figure this out, because I think we had so many ways of analyzing and sort of understanding politics and political campaigns last year. And by any of those historical or traditional measurements, he was a dead candidate walking on Election Day. I mean, you just take that Access Hollywood story a few weeks before the election, and I think you multiply that by 10 in terms of the number of issues he hit. I mean, you had 65% of the people saying he wasn't competent. You had 65% saying the guy wasn't qualified to be president. And he's still on Election Day.
But there was that movement. Candidates in that race, Steve, who had historically high unfavorable ratings for presidential candidates. Unprecedented. Both of them were underwater. Both of them, he was at about 60% unfavorable. The entire campaign, Hillary Clinton was over 50% unfavorable. Yet when you look at, we're talking about, I mean, you makes a good point about some of these states, but remember, he won white non-college voters on Election Day by a historic amount. I think Ronald Reagan was the last
39 points. He won
39 points.
That's right.
If you look at favorable rating right now in Quinnipiac among white non-college voters, it's 43 favorable and about 57 unfavorable. This is a massive shift. This is not a minor shift, and I think it's because you got to stop focusing on the top line numbers. He doesn't have an opponent out there.
The question I'm asking you is he had bad numbers with those voters in terms of what they thought of him during the campaign. And on election day, they voted for him.
You were running in a race against another candidate with high unfavorable ratings and two third-party candidates who pulled about 8% of the vote. Remember, across 3 states, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan, I should remember them off the tip of my tongue, we lost by 77,000 votes. 38,000 people vote differently, and we have a different president. That's how small the margin was, despite his delusional notion that he won some historic win.
Okay, well, Hugh, let me ask you from that standpoint then, because this is one of the interpretations that's out there. I think a lot of Democrats like this interpretation that, hey, look how small that margin was. Joel just extended out there 77,000 votes, 3 states, and it was Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton had almost as bad numbers as Donald Trump. If the Democrats just don't nominate Hillary Clinton again, they make up those 77,000 votes. What do you say to that?
Well, it's possible. The stun was so palpable in November that I'm still recovering from it. I was as wrong as everybody else, and that's why I'm so hesitant to come up with other than the fact that he was a meteor strike on American politics, and he remains a very potent force out there. If Democrats nominate someone with just high favorables, the remarkable Kamala Harris, for example, is just a palimpsest on which a lot will be written, and she's got amazing positives. That would be a tough race. But I point to 538 today, their analysis from Nate Silver, which is if Democrats carry every congressional seat that Secretary Clinton carried in district and all those that Donald Trump carried by less than 3%, they're still not going to take the House back, and they're going to lose 5 net Senate seats. So there's a bifurcation in American politics. And I think it comes back to Obamacare. I really do. I really do believe people have lost money with which to live their lives as a result of this disastrous policy. And it will come down to an argument over 15 months about who is advancing the right agenda for working-class Americans. And thus far, the Democrats have not articulated one. Donald Trump, that Foxconn story that you brought up just now, that is a huge deal in Wisconsin and Michigan. And if he repeats it in Pennsylvania and Ohio, the Trump coalition will stand as strong as it was in Youngstown 2 weeks ago, where the building was packed and the line was long outside.
Well, and this is a discussion for another time. I think there's another one here just about what makes a good candidate, what makes a strong. I mean, I can remember in the run-up to 2004, every Democrat said they had to nominate John Kerry because he was a strong candidate, he was a veteran, and after the election, he looked very different. So what looks like a strong candidate now may not once they go through the rough and tumble. Anyway, Joel.